Lions, gorillas, and zebras, oh my. Today we're talking about African safaris.
Welcome to Vacation Mavens, a family travel podcast with ideas for your next vacation and tips to get you out the door. Here are your hosts, Kim from Stuffed Suitcase and Tamara from We Three Travel.
Hi, this is Tamara, and I just wanted to remind you all that I'm hosting a small group trip to Portugal this fall for women only, and there's still spots available if you'd like to join me. It's going to be an amazing itinerary, 5 days with all kinds of things like cooking class, olive oil farm visit, wine tasting, a food tour, plus we're staying at some beautiful wine hotels. All the information is going to be in the show notes, and you can also send me a message if you have any questions, but I hope that you'll join me. So, Kim, one of my bucket list trips that hopefully we can do in the next couple of years, although I'm starting to think maybe it could be like a college graduation present for Hannah, I don't know, is to take a safari. You know, I would love to go to Africa. I may have been to Morocco, but I would love to see more of the continent. And I know that you've had like 3 experiences, including one last summer in Kenya that I don't think we ever really talked about. So I was hoping that maybe today, I know like way in the past, we had done an episode about, you know, how to plan and book a safari, but I was hoping that maybe we could just kind of dive into a little bit like the different types of ones that you've done, how you book them, you know, just all of those things, because it's not just the price that's intimidating. It's just the logistics of it. And so I think that is, you know, anything that you can add to that would be helpful for anyone that's kind of wanting to move it off their bucket list and onto their actual travel plans.
Yeah, I actually have, it's kind of a good question because I feel like I've kind of, you know, solidified some thoughts about that. So for people who are wondering, I've been on 3 kind of safari type vacations. The first was many years ago. I went to Botswana, so Chobe National Park, and that was a trip that was kind of partnered. I was over there helping my father-in-law with a project. And so we flew basically into South Africa, and then he felt confident enough. He drove us into Gaborone, Botswana, which I would never drive myself in across borders in Africa personally. But at that time I'm like, sure, let's go, Dad, you know. But so that was one thing. And then we ended up at a kind of all-inclusive lodge for a few nights on the Chobe River. And so then from there we flew back and did a couple nights on a South African game lodge, which is something to keep in mind. I'll get more on that later. But so that was my first trip. My second trip was actually a trip to Uganda, and that was booked with friends. Some of our friends, we did it, I guess it's been 2 years now, which is kind of crazy to think about. But that was booked through a tour agency, and all the logistics were handled by the tour agency based on here's kind of what we're interested in, and this is the time we have. And they made all the logistical arrangements. And then my most recent trip was booked with I just got a great points deal at an all-inclusive, the JW Marriott Masai Mara, which is in Kenya. And so then that was booked, like the extra little legs and stuff were booked via the JW, and then my own little bit of research. So I have a little bit of a mindset of how each works. And then I have a friend who was on that Kenya trip with, and she's actually done like an overlanding trip where she went to multiple safaris, which is a bit like what we did with Uganda. And so I kind of have an idea of how that logistically works and what people might think about that. So I'm looking forward to kind of diving into this because I think those things really matter to people when they're planning a trip.
Definitely, because I can picture like if I wanted to go, I would probably want to go to at least a couple different locations. But I guess I also wonder, like, do you get tired of doing it? But then I know you see different animals, different experiences in different locations too. And so I would probably be looking at something where it's, looked to book with an agency that handles all the either inter-country flights or overland or however that works. So
exactly.
Do you want to talk us through the pros and cons of each, or would you like to talk about your favorites or your recommends? Yeah,
I think that for most people who are wanting to plan a trip, I think that would be what I would highly recommend, or at least you plan, hey, a 5-day trip with an agency, and then you're going to tack on your own little I'm going to just book this hotel and fly, and I can make the arrangements with the hotel. Most of the nicer upscale hotels in a lot of the countries that I've been to, at least, and granted, I've never been to Western Africa. This is mostly Southern Africa and some of Eastern. So it's a little different, depending on the regions. And I'm not familiar with, just like you've been to Morocco, and I'm not familiar with any of that area. So I'm going based on the fact that I've been to Botswana, Uganda, and Kenya. And something to keep in mind is that booking with a safari company is probably going to be a little pricier, but if you do book with someone, I would highly, highly recommend you find a local outfitter to book with. And that the only hindrance with that is it feels a little weird because you kind of talk to them via email, and then you kind of have to make bank deposit drafts. You can't just give them a credit card to charge. So it gets a little more awkward for people. And our friend Eric has done it often. So that's why I kind of know that that's just the way it works over there. And so that is something that maybe people are a little more uncomfortable with, but you will save a lot of money versus if you go to a African tour agency that's out of the US based or even, UK based, you're going to pay a premium price.
I remember when I worked as a travel advisor, we would use some of these companies like Abercrombie and Kent, or
yes,
I can't even think of the others, but they're so pricey because you have multiple layers of basically commissions and things built into that, a lot of middleman. But you're of course nervous to just do some Google research and then make a decision. But it's nice when you can talk to someone like yourself that's worked with a specific, provider that you can recommend. The other thing that I've seen is that they don't have too many of them anymore, but they do still have the travel and adventure shows that go city to city. And I've met with some of the African safari providers at those in the past. And I feel well, at least you're a real person, you're a legit company that is coming to the US, and all of that. I'm not just sending my bank draft to someone I've, don't know if there's really somebody on the other end.
Exactly. That I just found from Googling.
Yeah.
No, I think that's good. And I do know that there's a lot of Facebook groups as well. And blogs. And so I think it's a good thing. So for Uganda, we use the Uganda Safari Company. And they were amazing, and they're locally based. So a lot of the money goes right back into the lodges and the tour operators and the guides. And so it just feels good knowing that you're really supporting. The overhead is going directly into those places. The overhead's not going into a third party that's based in New York that answers phones and runs the website. And so that one, if you're going to go to Uganda, the Uganda Safari Company, they were amazing. And something also to keep in mind is we wanted to go on a gorilla safari, so that's why we picked Uganda. Rwanda is the other popular place for gorilla safari. Rwanda does have a higher permit price for gorilla safaris. And so the overhead and the pricing for Uganda might be a little bit more for the trip than what you would expect to pay in Uganda. And then when you look at someplace like Uganda versus when we were in Kenya, the tourism infrastructure is much larger and more popular in, say, Kenya and Tanzania and South Africa. So you're going to be paying a higher premium on those places for a safari vacation. Whereas when we were in Uganda, we were staying in luxury safaris, and it was probably half the price of what you'd pay for Kenya. And so it's just something to keep in mind is that if you're wanting to save money, consider looking at a country that's not, the one that everyone thinks of. And that would be kind of a little bit of my advice I would recommend. Even Botswana's getting up there now as being very popular.
I've heard Botswana is very expensive.
Yeah, exactly. But when we went, it was a little more affordable than South Africa. So going to a lodge, and again, we went to a local lodge. I think it was Kasane Lodge. I got to remember, I've got a blog post about it that I can give you with the name of the lodge. But it was right on the river. It was small, boutique. Everyone had communal meals. We were there with an Australian couple and a UK family, and then us. And so it was very small oriented group. And it was much cheaper than, a lot of Americans were at the ritzier resort down the river. And so it kind of goes to look into some of those smaller local operators or lodges can save you a bit of money versus just what you expect to pay if you book through Marriott.com or, Expedia or something like that. So that is some things to keep in mind.
Can you talk a little bit about what the actual on-the-ground experience is at some of these lodges? Like, are they the individual tents? Is it more hotel-like? I'm sure it's a mix of both. What is it like when you're actually there?
It varies quite a bit. Like, one of the things I've always wanted to go to is Namibia. And I know that they do a lot of the overlander campers with Namibia and stuff, like through some of their areas. But I've never experienced that. I'm like you, Tamara. I kind of like doors and bathrooms. So I've never had anything that's not indoor plumbing and all of that. I did stay when we were in Uganda. We did stay at like a glamping that was very upscale, but it was tinted and you had to request hot water for a shower. And so then they would bring it and fill up kind of your outside bucket thing. And then you could shower. You'd pull the shower thing. And that was still considered luxury, but it was just because the infrastructure in some of these countries just isn't there. They don't have running water. I mean, especially in Uganda, you're walking near, the women and kids are going down to the river to get some water to take back where they're living because there's just no infrastructure. And that's the other thing to keep in mind is that when you say like you want to have the extra experience of going to multiple places. So that's kind of what we did in Uganda where we did it in Botswana a little bit as well, but mostly focused for safari on Chobe. And roads are not like a thing. So it seems like, oh, you can just go from this national park to this national park. Say we went from Queen Elizabeth National Park to Bwindi, but you can't just drive it because it's not a straight shot and there's not like the roads are kind of not great. And so it can take a lot of time. So there's a lot of these planes that you do, a lot of bush planes in Africa, which are an extra fee that you need to consider. So if you're going from, Nairobi and you want to go to, where we went to the Masai Mara, we had to pay, I think it was $200 each way I think I paid $400 for both of us. So maybe it was $200 round trip for a bush plane to get us from an airstrip near Nairobi, which we had to take, transport over to that and then get the bush plane to the airstrip near the lodge. And then the lodge had a truck that came and picked us up. So those are all considerations that you have to keep in mind. That was for our JW Marriott. And one thing to think about is that when you stay at a lodge like that, we stayed there for 5 nights and it started kind of getting there. The lodge guides are really good. We went during wildebeest season. It was supposed to be the Great Migration. And so one of our days of our 5 nights was spent driving out to the river to see if there was going to be a crossing and just kind of take that in. So it created a little bit of variety, but otherwise you're driving around pretty much the same park because you're going in and out of the lodge each day. And a lot of these guides that are good, they know, okay, I know that if we're going to spot lions, they normally hang out here. And if we're going to spot rhinoceros, I'm, trying to get them, they're here. And if we want to see elephants, they're normally over here. So they know that. So each day you kind of vary. A lot of times you have a morning drive and then an evening drive. And so you go out in the morning, early in the morning, then you come back and you relax to the lodge. And then you go out for an evening drive and sunset. And then you come back and have dinner. So that's kind of what the lodge situation is like. So if you're planning like a 1-week trip, I would not recommend just staying at one lodge for 1 week. However, when we did our big Uganda trip, we were there for, I want to say 6 nights, and it started getting a little exhausting moving places every one night or so because we came in and then we had a bush plane and then, we stayed at one lodge for 1 night and then we went out on a drive, stayed again, and then we got up early and moved to the next national park. So you're constantly moving. So that's what I would keep in mind about what on the ground. Hopefully that answered your question a bit of what the on the ground experience is like.
Yeah. So maybe you want to have, what would you say, like ideally, like would you go to 2 or 3 different places maybe, but spend like 2 or 3 nights in each one or more?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say 3 nights is ideal to help it sort of still feel like a vacation, especially if you're in a place like Masai Mara. Like Masai Mara, our 5 nights there, especially because it was during the migration, that was amazing. It was fabulous. And so Masai Mara has so many animals and so much variety. You can find stuff to look for each day and you get lucky each day. There's variety. But when we were, like when we were at the Chobe Lodge that we were at, we did a river safari one day and then we did a driving safari into the national park the next day. And then we had one more river safari on our other night because we were there for 3 nights. And so there was variety in that because oh, it was a river safari and then it was a driving safari. But by the fifth day, you would be kind of sick of going like, oh, it's another river safari. We're going to see the same like elephants and crocodile and hippos and, that sort of thing. So it's good to have variety, like find out if you can get a river safari in there or, mix Masai Mara because there are so many animals there. It's nice. And then that was the other thing in Uganda when we were in Queen Elizabeth National Park. I'm trying to remember now. Now I'm blanking. We had to go to, I want to say Etosha, but I'm pretty sure that's the Namibia one. I don't have my itinerary in front of me, but we went to one place just to look for lions and then they weren't there. And so it was like, we spent a whole day driving and it was still other animals and still pretty, but you had to go very far out of your way to find lions when we were in Uganda. And then like one of the national parks, there was no giraffes in that area. All the giraffes were up in Murchison Falls, like up in the northern part of the country. And, but again, in Uganda, we ended up doing a riverboat. They just put it on our itinerary as a riverboat trip. And so we didn't know what we were getting into. And it turned out to be like the Jungle Cruise in real life. It was amazing. All the animals. It was, we were just thinking, oh, it's like this little boat tour. Cause again, we booked this through the Uganda Safari Company. And so we thought it was just going to be a boat trip and pretty, but we had no idea, like every foot there was buffalo and elephants and birds and zebras and everything. All of them were down on the river all together. It was insane. It was so cool.
Yeah. So I guess that's one question that I would have is like, where do you go to see the different animals? I mean, obviously gorillas, Uganda, Rwanda. If you want big five, where do you go? Like, I don't know how much of that but like, so if someone, if this is going to be their one time that they go to Africa and get to do this, like, where can you see the most variety, I guess?
Yep. And I think that's one of the biggest things they need to research. I know Masai Mara, Kenya, I would highly recommend if people are really interested in like big five, definitely Masai Mara, Kenya is amazing. They had everything there. And so we were lucky enough on our final day. We were like, we just need a rhino. We just need a rhino. And sure, we got one. And so it was amazing. That was my first time ever seeing lions was Masai Mara as well.
Oh, really?
And so, yep. Yeah. Cause so that's something you need to really know, like what your animal is. Like if you really want lions, then you need to, and this is again, where it works really well if you work with a local tour company, because they're going to know, oh, well, lions, don't hang out at Queen Elizabeth National Park. So you'd have to go over to this other place, which is it was a 4-hour drive, that sort of thing. So it's kind of good to be working with someone and understand all of that where, if you're in Uganda and you're going gorillas, Bwindi National Forest is where you do it at. And Bwindi is its own little area, and getting into Bwindi is like, it's like kind of the cloud forest type stuff. So getting there is very challenging and takes some logistics. Like we ended up hiking. And this was another thing, Africa, you really need to be aware of. It's a very much more laid back travel situation in a lot of ways. So they told us we were going to be hiking to our lodge in Bwindi to save from having, if we were willing, to save from the car ride. And I think we could have taken another bush plane, but we all thought, oh, it sounds fun to hike in the middle of Africa, right? And who gets to experience that? So we signed up for it and they were like, oh yeah, it's just a, small hike to the lodge. And so thankfully we were all geared up for gorilla hiking, but it ended up being a 10-kilometer hike up mountains.
And didn't you have to like bushwhack too?
They were like bushwhacking. We were, so they had security there with guns, which you never know, especially in Uganda, you are kind of on the border. The area we were at, you're on the border of, I'm blanking of what I'm trying to think of now, but you're on the border of where there's rebel forces and issues. But they always say it's for the wildlife, but you always wonder like which wildlife, like human or animal. But nobody could tell us like what the distance is going to be or how much longer. And they just all kept saying like almost. And you pay for these guides who carried our bags on their heads the whole way. And they asked for $20, but none of us paid them $20 after they hiked for 10 kilometers. Carrying all of our suitcases, which by the way, you want to have soft bags. So that's something to keep in mind. Everyone tells you that you need to have soft-sided luggage. And then a bunch of Americans show up with hard-sided luggage and they just deal with it. But when you're doing those kind of more adventurous trips where your bag needs to get carried to and from lodges, like upstairs and stuff, it's much easier for those guys. So you're nicer to your guides if you just have soft-sided luggage that can really be crammed places and also be carried on heads, because that's how a lot of them carry stuff. So just keep that in mind as well.
And I'm assuming when you said none of you paid them $20, that you paid them more than $20.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Much more than $20. Yeah. Same with the gorilla trekking. And we found out with the gorilla trekking. So in Bwindi National Forest, I think there was 3 families that you get assigned, and each day, each group gets like 9 people. I'm blanking now. I have all this written down, but it's very limited on how many permits people get to do. And you get 1 hour with the gorillas. And so every day, those 18 people show up to go hike to those 3 separate groups. And the people who come that are willing to, they're your porters. That's what they're called, as porters. And they'll carry your bag all the way down the mountains as you're trekking around looking for these gorillas. And again, they ask for the recommended payment is $20. And they get to be selected once a month. It's their turn again. And so that $20 like invests in their families. So it's always nice to just go a little more than that. Of course, you don't want to become the obnoxious Americans that outprice what normalcy is in their economy, but it is nice to just go a little above and beyond and help them out like they helped you out, because it's hard work and it saved me a lot having them carry my bags. Yeah. So
well, I imagine packing for safari is a little challenging because, you can't pack that much, but you must get dusty and dirty.
Yep. Yeah, so that's the other nice thing about the reason I think this is a good bucket list trip is if you stay at nicer lodges, they all have free laundry. And so you leave your laundry in a bag, the morning of, you put your laundry there, and then it's normally back to you. Some lodges have it to you that night, and then other lodges have it back to you the next day. And so it's very convenient. I think they just have learned that that's a needed thing. And so, packing, like easy to wash things, don't pack your cashmere, because you don't really know how they're going to wash stuff. I don't think they have I don't know if they have a delicate cycle. What you can request, you sort of just put it in the bag and get it back. So just making sure that you pack things that wash well and are easy to pack and lightweight. Our friend Carolyn, the merino wool stuff is always great. I know Eric loves that stuff as well, but make sure that it can just be washed and dried. And you can try and request stuff like, don't dry this or hang it to dry. But it's easier if you just have clothes that wash up well and are lightweight and easy to pack and can be, worn again. And then just check with if you book through a guide or if you're booking the hotel directly, just check and see what the laundry facilities are like. Cause that really can go far, as if you just have, 3 or 4 go-to outfits and kind of switch out your pants and everything. And if you have clean washable stuff, you can even, just do some stuff in your sink in your room, but it definitely is a little trickier.
Yeah, that's really nice to know about, because I wouldn't have expected, that service. And maybe we talked about this one time, or maybe it was on your Instagram or something, but isn't there something like you shouldn't wear white or you shouldn't wear black, or like something attracts
blues?
Some
Mosquitoes, blues. Okay. So you want to avoid blues. Yeah. So you don't want to have a lot of blues and navies. And then for safari drives, typically they tell you not to have a lot of color because it can throw off the animals. Like it's very noticeable to them. So you definitely want more neutral palettes. White is just because of dust. And, but I wear a lot of white because it's also cool. And then if you have the laundry service, you can, just have it get washed up and it's fine. But, you definitely want, softer softer neutrals is what I would say.
Like what people show you on, like when you watch TV and you see people on safari, there's a reason why that's what
there's a reason why. Yeah. And then I would also just say closed-toed shoes. Maybe make sure you have like some Kleenex and stuff. That's the other thing, is when you're on these safari rides, it's dusty. I have a mosquito scarf that I bought that, oh my goodness, on our trip in Kenya, it saved us so much, because their car is driving fast sometimes because he wants to get you to the places where the animals were just spotted. And it's all open air vehicles. And so the dust can just be brutal, especially if you're passing another car, like the two of you are passing. And so I bought a mosquito bug shield scarf that was just amazing. It was really lightweight, and it also worked really well for putting around your neck or under your hat for sun protection as well. So I'm actually working.
Do you wear it like a bandana?
Yes.
You're gonna wrap
So I just wore it over. Yeah. I wore it actually as a head covering. So I kind of draped it off the top of my head, and then I put my hat on to help it hold. And then I wrapped it kind of across my face, when the cars would come or when it was really dusty.
Yeah.
And then, because I also wore sunglasses, and so then I could pull it back down when it wasn't dusty, but then it's just easy, so it's kind of, that's how I did it.
Or you could have like a buff that you pull up or something like that. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people do buffs. I just liked the scarf because buffs kind of make me claustrophobic and bother me. So this one I could just rearrange it if I wanted and things like that.
Yeah.
And then, so when you're out on these safaris, sometimes especially if you're on a full day one, or if you're on a like overlanding where you're moving from one place to another place and you're looking for animals along the way, there's no bathrooms. So you just, when you're packing and picking your clothes, make sure it's stuff also that's easy to get on and off, and you don't want like a jumpsuit that you've got to flash everyone your chest to get your pants down, because literally they just park over at the side of the road and you go to kind of the back of the vehicle, so it's a little awkward. I know,
because I've thought about that, because you don't want to go too far because animals.
Yep. Exactly. It's a little awkward. Like one time he pulled us over and then another car came by while Lindsay and I were totally squatting, and I was like, oh lovely. This is just wonderple. But I'm never going to see those people again in my life, and it's just the way it works there.
So you have to be ready for that. Yeah.
So anyways, kind of funniness, but so I know it was kind of all over the place, but hopefully people got some ideas about African safaris and what I would recommend. And any final questions or tips you're wondering to wrap it out?
Yeah, I know that we're looking to wrap up, but I have a couple of questions I think would be on a lot of people's minds. And one of them, you mentioned mosquitoes. So can you talk a little bit about some of the either vaccinations or medications that you need to do or things you need to be aware of? Because I know that there's some areas where it's like malaria free and stuff like that.
Yep. So. So you definitely want to figure out your countries that you're visiting, what the requirements are. Yellow fever is a common one that's required to go into a few places. We needed it for Uganda. Wasn't necessary for Kenya, and it wasn't necessary for Botswana, so I got it for our Uganda trip. But you can normally go to one of your local pharmacies and call them or ask about if they have a travel clinic. One of my biggest tips is to go to your primary care physician, assuming that they're knowledgeable and willing to do this, and tell them what you need based on your research and their research. They'll check the CDC guidelines and figure out what that country's requirements are. And then they can write you the prescription for the items that they're going to tell you need. And then you can go to a travel clinic or things like that and actually get the shots and stuff, where the travel clinics often charge you a $100 or so fee to do a consultation and tell you what vaccines you need. But if you go through your primary care, you can probably have it as your insurance covers it.
Okay.
So that's something to keep in mind if you're wanting to save a little bit of money. The yellow fever vaccine is not cheap, but it's supposed to last 10 years. Now they're saying it's lifetime possibly. So I don't know where that's going to go. Right now, mine that I got 2 years ago is a 10-year expiration, but there's some thought that it's actually going to be considered a lifetime thing. And then mosquitoes is the big one. That is for malaria. And there are malaria meds that people take. I personally get migraines and dizziness from the common, I can't remember the name of it. I think it starts with an A, but there's a common one that they give you for malaria that you take right before you start going on the trip. And then you take it until the end of your trip, like for a couple days. And I can't do that because literally I just can't. And some areas aren't a problem. Like when I was in Chobe, they actually didn't say that mosquitoes were a problem. They do have mosquito nettings around the beds at a lot of places, but I think that's also just that's what people expect. When you're going on one of these vacations, it's just kind of the aesthetic that is expected. But I do think that they serve a purpose to just give you a little bit more protection at night. But there are some alternatives. So if you are going to a place where they are worried about malaria and you do need to, and all that can be found on like the CDC website, I think it's CDC, it might be travel state, but you just take a search for vaccine requirements for Uganda or for Kenya, and it'll tell you everything. And typhoid is the other one that you often have to get. And that one you can do an oral or you can do a shot. I did the oral the first time, I hated it. And then I did the shot most recently because one is good for like 3 years and one's good for 5 years. So those are some of the main ones you want to keep in mind. And then, of course, all your hepatitis ones, which are becoming more and more common in the U.S. anyways, but you'll want to talk to your primary care physician and find out which hepatitis that you've had, because that's another one that you want to take along. But that is something it is something that has to be considered. And also visa requirements. You often have to have a visa and a lot of times apply online. And sometimes the websites for some of the countries for the visa application are quite problematic.
Yeah,
So you need
it's
a little
not like
patience.
when you go to a Caribbean island and it requires a visa, but it's basically you just fill out a form when you get there and give them.
When you get there, it's not not the on arrival type thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you need to figure that out in advance. The other question I have for you, just to close out, is like best time to go. Obviously, it's a huge continent, so that can vary. But just any thoughts on like best time to go?
Yeah, you really have to look up where you're going. It varies so much based on the area. I know Botswana has way more, like the rainy season versus the lush season will affect what you can see quite a bit. So you want to keep that in mind as well. Like what's more important do you want? Because the dry season is typically when people want to go because you don't have rainy days and stuff has died back so you don't want to go on the cusp of like from wet to dry because everything's lush. And so you want things to kind of be dried out a bit so that you can animal spotting is easier, if that makes sense. Because if everything's green and lush, then animals have more camouflage and can hide better. So you kind of want to go towards, if you're trying to look for a shoulder season, I would look at the end of the dry season. Most people will try and go during peak dry season. So again, it's a huge continent, so it depends on the country. So you'd want to do some research along those ways. The other thing to keep in mind is that temperatures vary greatly. Like when we were going to Masai Mara, one of the things I was thinking about taking Lizzie when I first was booking my trip, and she's like, oh, I do not want to go to Africa in August. But Masai Mara is very consistent year-round temperature-wise. And so we were never boiling hot because it's got some elevation to it. And so we were always, it could get in the 80s-ish, but in the mornings when we would start out, they'd give us blankets and we'd be like wrapped up because it can be cool in the evenings until the sun comes up.
Good to know.
So the packing, you really need to pack with layers in mind and just kind of lightweight stuff. But it's really going to depend on what country you're going to, because depending on the elevation is going to, Uganda was the same way. We had very nice weather and we went in July. And so it's just going to depend on, it got hot, but it's not horrible, but it was cool in the mornings. So it really depends on the country you're going to and what the elevation is like.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm, just more and more eager to finally plan a trip.
I love it. I want to go back. I love it.
Yeah.
It's so good. They're great.
Good. Well, thanks for sharing that. And stay tuned because we are going to be doing some more episodes than we had last year. So apologize for that kind of like silence for a while, but we've just both been so busy. So we're going to try to put out some more regular episodes. It might be a little shorter, but keep you up to date on what we're doing and all of the tips that we're learning along the way. So stay tuned.
Talk to you guys soon.
Bye.